When I was little, I had just moved to the US. Our family, not having much money, decided to stay at my aunt's place until my dad got a steady job. My aunt was obsessed with dolls and had a huge shelf with about 50 dressed in every color of the rainbow. So one night, we were watching a movie. Everyone is getting tired, and so they decided to go to bed. I decided to stay out in the living room and finish the movie. Keep in mind that I watched everyone go to their rooms. So the movie ends, and I decide to go to bed. I walk past the dolls into the hallway, shutting off the light as I walk. As I'm entering my room, I decided that it's probably a good idea to use the restroom first. I turn 180 degrees, turn the corner, and at the opposite end of a 30-foot hallway, I see a tiny outline of what looks to be a doll. I was young and confused, so I walked about 10 feet to the light switch and flip it. I kid you not, there was a doll with a red dress and red, bedazzled, high-heel shoes. I was scared silly and ran back to my mom to tell her what happened. She went outside with me to take a look, but there was no doll in sight. A total of 30 to 45 seconds passed from me running to my mom being with me. We went to the living room to the shelf, and I can't tell you how scared, freaked, and just terrified I was. The same doll, red dress, red high heels, was sitting in its original position, but her body was facing the wall and her head toward us. And needless to say, we moved out about a week afterwards. Dolls terrify me, and clowns, but I don't really personally have a legitimate reason for being scared of clowns. But dolls, I have a good reason to be scared of them. My grandmother used to crochet dresses for dolls. We had this porcelain doll that she made a beautiful magenta and white dress for, and my mom put it in my room for decoration. Now, I didn't mind it at first, because it reminded me of my grandmother, whom I loved very much. When I was about 12, my half-sister was living with us, and her and I would stay up and talk all the time. We were, as per usual, talking, and it was about 11 o'clock. The way our beds were set up, I had to look to my left to see her, and she to her right. The doll was on a cabinet in front of us, so we could see it out of the corner of our eyes. So we were laying there talking about music, when suddenly, we both see something move out of the corners of our eyes. We both whipped our heads toward the doll, not noticing anything odd, just the doll staring straight ahead, like always. We shrugged it off and went back to talking. A few minutes later, we see movement again, and this time, we see a difference. The doll's head is facing towards my sister. We were frozen in fear for a good 30 seconds. I started shaking and asked my sister if she saw what I saw, stuttering like crazy. All she could do was nod. Still being scared, we refused to move. Then the doll's head whipped towards me. While we were staring at it, we jumped up and booked it out of there and sat in the living room for a good hour or so. Then I got up the courage to go back in, my sister following farther behind. I crept in and the doll's head was back to normal. I tiptoed past it to grab a blanket to throw over the doll. I stood in front of it, my whole body trembling, and quickly threw a blanket over it. I automatically felt the air in the room become lighter. I thought everything was okay, so I hopped back into my bed. My sister thought I was crazy, but eventually she joined me back in our room. The next morning, we woke up to see the blanket on the ground, and the doll leaning as far forward as possible, arms outstretched towards us, and its head facing me. We screamed, and our parents came rushing in. They asked what was wrong, and through tears we explained what happened last night and what we woke up to. My mom, the skeptic that she no longer is, by the way, told us we were dreaming. Our dad, on the other hand, well, he moved the doll out of our room for a while, until my mom put it back. It was out of our room for a good month, and my sister and I noticed a difference right away. But as soon as that thing was back, we didn't like our room. The air felt heavy, and it was always colder in there. We moved out of that apartment and into a house on my uncle's land. But my mom still has that doll. I don't know where she put it, but just so long as it's not in my room, I don't care where it is. I'd like to remember it how I used to, as a memory of my grandmother, who passed away when I was in 5th grade. But I get goosebumps and get scared every time I think of that damn thing. When I was 10, I had quite the collection of dolls. For some strange reason, I decided to decorate my room with them. My room was in the basement, and I had a shelf that circled the room. I delicately placed my favorites around the room. Being watched wasn't something I was worried about. In fact, I found them oddly comforting. My 11th birthday rolled around, and I couldn't wait to see what new dolls I would get. Everyone in my family knew of my obsession and would gift me with a new friend every year. This year my grandmother took the cake with the gorgeous doll she brought me. I still vividly remember her glassy green eyes, flawless pale skin, sleek black hair pulled back with a pink ribbon, and a white gown that slightly resembled one used for baptisms. I was so excited to show her her new home. I made room on my shelf across the room, almost opposite my bed, so that I would have the best view of her. That night, I dozed off staring at her, making up a story, a background, a life. I have never had a more vivid dream, not before nor after that night. I was low to the ground. It seemed like I was crawling, but it didn't feel like it, moving slowly toward my bedroom door. I could see the soft glow of my nightlight coming from under the door. I eased it open and walked towards my bed. That's when I noticed that I wasn't really me, because there in the bed was me, sleeping soundly. I was frightened, but I couldn't wake up. I crawled onto the bed and moved slowly toward sleeping me. In my line of sight, I saw two smooth, delicate, tiny hands reach for my throat. I jumped awake, breathing heavily. Across the room, I could see my doll, exactly where I left her. I got up, walked to the bathroom with a second glance at the doll. As I passed the mirror, I noticed something that still haunts me. 3 scratches on my neck, dried blood surrounding them. I tried writing them off to me accidentally doing it in my sleep, but that didn't last long. I walked back to my room, absent-mindedly flipping on the light, and stopped. There on the floor, facing the door, was my doll. Same innocent look as always, but with a small, almost unnoticeable smear of blood on her dress. I screamed and ran to my brother's room, and through tears tried to explain what happened. He didn't buy it, but wasn't about to send me away like that. I spent the rest of the night in his room. The next morning, I made him come with me back to my room. She was back on the shelf, as if she had never been moved. The smear of blood was still on her dress. We grabbed some old boxes and packed every one of those horrid things away. After some convincing and complaining, my mom finally agreed to take the dolls to the rented storage shed across town. It's 10 years later, and as far as I know, they are still there. For all I care, they can stay there. When I was little, I always liked being scared, creeped out, etc. So one day on my way home from school, I saw this china doll in the middle of a store window with a book next to it, entitled Porcelans Docken av Glas, which apparently means the glass china doll in Swedish. I decided that I needed to read that book, but I couldn't afford it. I then walked into the store and asked to look around. I crept up to the doll book and put it in my pocket while no one was watching. I then left the store and walked home. When I opened the book, I realized that it was all in Swedish. My grandfather grew up in Sweden, and he can speak Swedish fluently, so I brought the book to him. He took one look at the cover and yelled out loud. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard. He asked me where I got the book and that it was important that he knows. I said from the antique store a couple blocks away. He jumped out of his chair and flew out the door. I was frightened, so I followed him, but when we arrived at the store I had visited only 2 hours ago, we saw that it had been completely cleared, except for the glass doll. My grandpa took the book from me and told me to go home. That night, while I was sleeping, I felt something brush my legs, and I opened my eyes. I saw the same glass doll from the antique store with outstretched fingernails, scratching my bare legs. I tried to yelp out in fear, but no sound escaped my throat. I tried to get out of bed, but I was too scared to move. The doll kept on scraping my legs with her long nails, getting harder each time. My legs started to bleed from the nails, and then my grandpa burst into the room and grabbed the doll. He took the doll and smashed its head into the nightstand. The doll seemed to smile at me, and then its head smashed into a million pieces. I leaped out of my bed and sobbed in my grandfather's arms. The book was apparently just a folk tale that my grandpa had heard. The book and the doll were not supposed to be real. I still have those awful scars on my leg from the doll's nails. The folk tale was about the China doll whose nails would grow longer and longer during the night and scratch people to death. That was the most frightening night of my life, and I still haven't recovered.